Welcome to Gossip About Gossip, powered by Hedera Hashgraph. In each episode, we'll cut through the hype of blockchain promises and explore real-world examples of organizations creating the next generation of decentralized applications, which will bring trust back to the internet for us all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Gossip About Gossip, the podcast where we talk about real-world applications of distributed ledger technology. My name is Zenobia Gottschalk, and I'm the SVP of Communications here at Swirlds Labs, helping to grow the Hedera ecosystem. Today, I am really excited to welcome back Guy Harrison, who was previously the CTO at ProvenDB, which has since been acquired by OneSpan and where he now serves as an innovation architect. Hi, Guy. How are you?
Hi, Zenobia. Hello, everyone. Great to be here.
So I think we're going to do a little history rewind. I know there are folks in the ecosystem and the community who know what ProvenDB was as a standalone entity, but I'd love for those who don't, if you can just share a little bit of the background on what was ProvenDB standalone, and what were you all aiming to do with that?
Great. So we started working on ProvenDB in 2018, sort of midway through 2018. I got a small team together and got some funding to build the product. And I'm a database guy in deep background, worked a lot with MySQL, Oracle, all the different types of relational database, including Cassandra, Hadoop, and I've done a lot of work with MongoDB. And as a database guy, I was really intrigued by what blockchain could offer in terms of integrity, because it had been my experience that what's in the database was always just whatever I said it was. So the company might have thought that the data said something, and that was true. But if I'd wanted to change it, I always could have. And what's in the data is only as good as the application and only as good as the database administrator. And that's not good enough, really, if you think about it. You know, we should have sort of very great trust in the data and all our databases. We rely on them for pretty much everything. So I got interested in blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so forth, and thought, wouldn't it be great if we could have something that acted like a database, had queries, transactions, aggregates, all sorts of things we need to build modern applications, but also had the trust of distributed ledger technology. So that's what I set out to do. And if you want to think about ProvenDB very simply at its base level, it is a database system, but what it's writing to the database is backed up by transactional consensus messages, essentially, to a public ledger. And so when you look at a piece of data in a ProvenDB database, you can always know that it was created on this date and it hasn't been changed since then. And so if someone wants to come in and tamper with the database, maybe they can break through and do it. But it's a bit like a tamper evident seal. The seal will be broken. You'll know that the data has been manipulated with, so you can have, if the seal hasn't been broken, you can have absolute trust in it. So we launched that in 2020. We sort of launched, bang on at the start of the pandemic, which was a lot of fun. But we were sort of picking up developers and really aiming to sort of like look for people to make use of the system for interesting and worthwhile purposes. And we got quite a few interesting projects going. And I guess the only other thing to say historically is we also had a product built on ProvenDB, which was called Compliance Vault, which was more like a document management system. You didn't have to be a programmer to use it. You just put a PDF in, or you could email things in, your will, your patents, whatever you needed to sort of like assert the ownership and identity of, you could use Compliance Vault for that. So that's sort of like where we were at the beginning of this year when OneSpan's sort of closed the deal. We'd onboarded a few customers. We were doing some interesting things, and we got the attention of this sort of larger company who had sort of like bigger ideas for us, I guess.
Great. And I want to go back to who OneSpan is in just a minute, but I know you went through in detail. There's a blog on the Hedera site that talks about sort of your initial experiences on Ethereum and then the move to Hedera. Do you mind just briefly summarizing that for those folks who may not have read that?
Sure. It's a good story, and it talks a lot to how how ledgers have to behave for businesses to make use of them in a sort of like a profitable way. So we had done a bit on Bitcoin, but the transactions were incredibly expensive and very slow, right? You know, a Bitcoin transaction to be fully confirmed, it's like an hour, and that was sort of not a great experience. Ethereum gave us a better experience in terms of latency, and initially the cost was okay, but the cost floated with the value of Ethereum and the transaction load on the system. And during one particularly bad surge, the cost per transaction went up from something like 10 cents to $50. And this was just like absurd for us. It's like, I always use the analogy, if you were running a trucking company and, you know, obviously gas or petrol, as we call it, is what you spend to run your business, and suddenly gas goes up by sort of 2,000%, you're out of business. You can no longer run profitably. And that was exactly the same situation we were in. Now, I should point out, we don't do one transaction per document or per database transaction. We use Merkle trees to sort of aggregate them. So we weren't spending $50 per user transaction, but nevertheless, we were spending $50 every few minutes on Ethereum transactions. So we'd already started using Hedera, and were very impressed with it. But the thing that at that point made it just a no-brainer to switch over was Hedera's sort of guaranteed pricing, where the transactions cost 10 cents, not in HBARs, but in actual, US dollars. So you know for certain what your costs are going to be. And if you're trying to run a business and trying to project profit and loss or do any of the normal things that businesses have to do, that's what you need. Now, as well as that, there's lots of other things we like about Hedera. It's very fast. The APIs are great to work with. And it's got a very, very low carbon footprint. In fact, as I'm sure you can, elaborate on, it's carbon negative in that the very small carbon footprint it has is offset. You're buying carbon credits to offset even that footprint. So, it sounds a bit weird, but the more transactions you do on Hedera, the less carbon footprint you have, which is amazing. And, we're all sort of like conscious of our effects on the environment. So, to some extent from a business point of view, it's partially feel good, but it's also a business imperative in a lot of places to be carbon neutral. I get this a lot when people are saying, I've got a database and it's got, a blockchain or a distributed ledger behind it. And then they say, oh, but isn't that sort of like, destroying the environment? And it's good to be able to say, not at all. In fact, we're using the most green blockchain ledger out there.
Right.
And in fact, it's even carbon neutral. So that was a great, additional benefit for us.
Okay. And so a lot of folks, I think, in the security space, InfoSec space, will know the name OneSpan, probably less familiar to the Web3 crowd. So can you now talk a little bit, shift gears and talk about what OneSpan is and why that acquisition made sense?
Yeah, sure. I hadn't come across OneSpan very much myself, in many, many decades in the industry. So I certainly understand if you're not sure who OneSpan is. OneSpan, 20 years ago, OneSpan was Vasco Data Security. It's a fairly big traditional security vendor doing all the sorts of things, pen testing, security, authentication systems. A lot of the big banks use OneSpan authenticators, hardware devices that generate a code, a bit like, we all use Google Authenticator or something nowadays. But yeah, exactly. But back in the day, and still in high security environments, a dedicated device is sometimes used, and we sell a huge number of these dedicated devices. But as OneSpan has evolved over time, it's become more focused, continuing to focus on security, but focusing as well on digital agreements and transactions. So the vision here is that the security side of OneSpan protects the identity and the verification of the people who are doing digital agreements, but we take it all the way forward into helping people interact in live sort of like rooms, notary systems, and then increasingly and very significantly in digital agreement signing, so electronic signatures. So in that vein, we are competing directly with Adobe and DocuSign and other vendors who are offering e-signature technologies, but we're doing it in the context of this broader security end-to-end transaction flow where we're, if you think about DocuSign signed the document, and that's all the responsibility they really take for. I'm not knocking them. We use DocuSign, and they're, leader of the pack and all that, but they're just narrowly focused on that one part of the interaction, whereas we're trying to focus on the whole long-term workflow around the digital agreement, including sort of the validation of participants and other things like notarization of important documents. And then there's the final pillar in that strategy. OneSpan wanted to have a sort of long-term vault for digital agreements, not just here's your digital agreement, stick it on a thumb drive, bury it in your backyard, do whatever you want with it, right? We wanted to offer a sort of like a protected long-term storage for digital agreements where you can be certain that if you need to enforce them in 10 or 20 years' time or whatever time span it is, that you can. And that's the key area in which our compliance vault technology and the ProvenDB core technology became particularly interesting, because they wanted more than just a database here. They wanted a tamper-proof database that could survive all the sorts of mishaps that could occur to a document over a long period of time.
And I think when the announcement came out, OneSpan called it QuantumSafe blockchain storage. Now, I love the catchy title, but can you break down for us a little bit more about what that meant?
Well, it's like a dream come true for me to be able to say sentences with blockchain and quantum in the same sentence, right? It's just I've been a science fiction nerd since I was like 9 years old, and so it's great to be dealing with the forefront of technologies, right? Of which today, basically AI, Web3, quantum computing, are definitely at the forefront of the technologies that are paradigm shifting. So the fact is that we'll stick with quantum for a bit, but it's just one part of this sort of like long-term landscape that we have to think about if we're wondering whether an agreement we sign is going to be valid in 5 or 10 years. Now, I'm sure that people are broadly aware that quantum computers are sort of like kind of in their early stages, though incredible amounts of money are being spent on them. We know for an absolute fact that quantum computers can break the public key infrastructure keys that are used to sign digital agreements and to do a lot of other authentication on the web. They're just not powerful enough to break the 248-bit or 496-bit keys that we're currently using. They can only break very small keys. But as they get more and more capacity, more qubits, which is the equivalent of bits for a quantum computer, they will be able to break bigger and bigger keys. And the risk here is that should there be a sudden breakthrough in quantum computing strength, the security infrastructure of the web itself would be endangered. So every time you do a HTTPS connection, like we're on now, Zenobia, you and I, where no one can eavesdrop on us because there was a HTTPS handshake, and that was effectively an exchange of public keys that allowed us then to encrypt messages to each other that could only be read by the person who had the private key, which is, just sitting safely on our computer. But a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could just take a public key, and spit out the private key. It's that dangerous, so all HTTPS traffic would disappear. And all the signatures that are used to sign digital agreements could also be faked. And not to get too much in the weeds here, but a digital agreement signature is a chain of trust from the certificate authority, who issues a root certificate that all our computers have sort of like pre-authorized, and then a couple of other certificates. And if those root certificates got compromised by a quantum computer, it would invalidate in one step millions of digital agreements. Millions of e-signatures could not be proven to be valid anymore. So how do you get around that? Well, one way is you need to put a timestamp into the document that can prove that this was signed before quantum computers became powerful enough to break them. So if you've got a signature in the future and it's just a signature 10 years from now with your bank, and you say, I didn't sign this, and they say, yes, you did, it's your signature. And you say, no, faked by a quantum computer, you can't prove that I signed this. They'll be able to come back and say, aha, but we have this blockchain signature that was done way before quantum computers existed that show that you did sign it. And that blockchain signature is effectively, in our case, a Hedera consensus message. And so that is the sort of like the solution. That is why we're saying it's quantum safe.
Yeah.
But and again, stop me if I'm getting too in the weeds here. So
no, I think
there are other ways
to
put time.
We have a very diverse audience, but I think we have folks who like this level of detail. So this is great.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just say one more thing about this sort of like particular matter. It's in the EU and elsewhere. It's recognised that that private keys could be compromised and that it's important to timestamp. And the solution is to use a timestamp authority, which itself uses the public key infrastructure. So the timestamping authorities will all be broken eventually by quantum computers. So you have to keep timestamping on top of the timestamp to make sure that you've got this sort of temporal chain. And this is sort of like the clunky solution that no one wants to use. Whereas what we're doing is a sort of like one single timestamp that will last forever, that won't expire, and that can sort of prove the provenance of the document definitively. Okay, so I've talked for a bit. I'll give you a chance to respond, but I want to come back to the other threats against digital agreements, because quantum is like the catchy one, the flashy one, but there are other sort of reasons why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, yeah, and I do think, I think if you are a business today, quantum may be a threat that you sort of say, yes, I have to get to at some point, but maybe I don't have to get to it in this budget cycle or even, next year's budget cycle. So would love for you to expand on some of the other threats that you're seeing and how OneSpan is dealing with that.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. That's what people are thinking. I can wait to do this. But if you're signing a document now and you expect it to be enforceable in 20 years, and maybe it's a loan document for sort of millions of dollars, no, you should be concerned now. So for the live HTTPS traffic, yeah, we can wait. Most of us don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry now that this conversation could be eavesdropped on by a quantum computer, because it'll be gone, in 10, 15 minutes. That'll be it. But the digital agreement lasts for decades, and so it lives into the time span, the quantum time span. And so you do have to worry about it now if you really do want to enforce that document later. But to go into the other reasons why a blockchain signature is so powerful in electronic signatures, it's still got to do with the long-term preservation, but it's against other threats, such as more traditional things of, say, like a hacked or leaked private key. Now, the certificate authorities go to incredible lengths to make sure that private keys never get leaked or hacked. But to be certain that the certificate authority's key won't be hacked over a 20-year time span it's being hopeful, really. I mean, there's not much sort of, yeah, it might be, but, to say it could never be leaked or never hacked, that's just nonsense. Of course it could. It's a piece of information stored in a system somewhere, and some human beings have access to it. And so it could get out. The other thing is, and partially because of these things, all digital certificates have expiry dates on them. And in the EU in particular, it's a legal requirement for you, if you want to enforce a document to the highest standard, for you to have an immutable timestamp or a series of timestamps that prove when the document was signed. If you think about it, when you sign a document using a private key, you're sort of proving the who and the what, but you're not proving the when. The signature has a date on it, but that date is just the clock on a computer somewhere. It's not a definitive cryptographically provable timestamp. So those are the three threats. Future technologies such as quantum computers, certificates expiring and you sort of like not re-signing your document, so that you end up 10 years from now with trying to assert something that's based on an expired digital certificate, and leaks and hacks. And so it's great to be in sort of like using one simple economical transaction to sort of like protect against all those three threats. And so, consequently, we're very excited about it.
Fantastic. And what comes next? So this is now available. You're engaging in conversations with customers. I don't know if you can share sort of any feedback or what the team is seeing after this has been announced.
Well, we got a lot of interest following the announcement. I think it is a little bit earlier. It's a bit early to say. It's a bit early to have any market data showing sort of like an effect on our business. We'd like to hope it does. It shouldn't hurt, right? I mean, it is a it is a unique feature, and I think it should be valuable to people. But I'm most pleased personally to be putting blockchain technology to use in a sort of a firm business context. I know a lot of us in the Web3 industry have been somewhat frustrated by what we thought was going to be a rapid paradigm shift in 2017. Everything's going to go Web3. If you ask people in 2017 what they thought 2023 was going to be like in terms of distributed applications and ledger technology, it would have been far ahead of what we've got. So, I'm pleased to see us put it to a solid use addressing business cases. And that's why it's so great to sort of like work with a sort of a company with very traditional sort of outlook and be able to sort of like find the right fit for it. Going forward, though, in OneSpan, we'll do some of the obvious things, which is to put ProvenDB as the record keeper for anything that we might need to be sort of proven for a regulatory or compliance purpose. So all audit logs and other things where there's any sort of like reason to think that they might become legally relevant or need to be sort of like proven to be completely pristine in terms of their authenticity. We'll be doing that. And then I guess this is very early days on this discussion, but there are forms of digital agreements that have very significant monetary value. Chattel paper is the usual example, where the chattel paper, the agreement literally has the dollar value of the chattel. So, and there can only be one person who owns that piece of chattel paper at any one time. Now, I'm sure sort of Hedera people are thinking, tokenize it. And that's exactly right. I think there's a lot of opportunity for tokenization to take the sort of protection of these sort of like, special documents that can only, where there has to be a single authoritative copy and where the chain of ownership needs to be able to be asserted in a very specific way. That's another sort of obvious area for us to sort of like move. And again, we have, with Hedera, great support for tokenization. So I'm not saying, by the way, to anyone that we're anti-Ethereum or anything else, or that we're totally wedded to Hedera. We're using Hedera for solid business reasons, and we'd be completely open to using other blockchains that have other advantages for other purposes. But at the moment, Hedera's got all of the tools and technologies we need, and the economics and the sustainability make it a sort of like continue to make it a good choice for us.
Yeah, you made an interesting point in terms of people would have thought that sort of the Web3 and DLT adoption might be further along by now. But I have a hypothesis that more people will be using DLT than realize that they are using it. And that is a good thing for our industry. So as your users end up using these offerings, do they understand that, outside of the sort of marketing that says, hey, this is written to a blockchain, do they have to do any of that interaction themselves? Do they have to, download a wallet? Do they have to engage directly, or is that behind the scenes?
No, that's all behind the scenes. That was one of our objectives with ProvenDB, was to allow developers to build blockchain-enabled applications without having to muck around with cryptocurrency. So, they'd pay us in dollars and we'd pay in crypto for the transactions. And it's the same thing here. Really with, it's one checkbox to sort of turn on the vaulting for OneSpan signed signatures. So, no one has to sort of jump any hurdles there. And but I agree with the premise, the implied premise there, that even just setting up a wallet and transferring money into the wallet is a bridge too far for, the average consumer. Maybe, certainly the average consumer of my age, younger people, obviously, we saw in the NFT craze, there was enough people willing to install a wallet if they thought it was cool enough or what have you. But, there's still sort of like, that's still some small sliver of the addressable market. And I think if you're wanting it to be sort of like 80% of the market who are using some sort of, wallet technology to interact with the web, well, you'll have to wait a long time. So in the meantime, it's important to bring along solutions that sort of like take the advantage of ledger technology, but which don't impose a cost upon the user. Look, the other things between, the high hopes and the dashed dreams, not dashed dreams, but you know what I mean. There are a lot of things that were inherent in the scalability of Ethereum. If Ethereum had proof of stake and sharding sort of 5 years earlier when the craze hit, then there might have been enough sort of like raw power in the system to bootstrap a new sort of paradigm. But as it was, it was totally, it was only really in demo mode if you think about it for building sort of like high performance apps. So, to have, and that again is where Hedera sort of like, arguably made more pragmatic decisions about what do people need to get going now. And they need, low cost, low latency transactions and, consequently, your customers and others like us are sort of like able to build things that work today and don't have to wait on sort of like some Ethereum improvements that are still possibly years off.
Well, Guy, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I think it's been really informative for our community. Any parting thoughts before we let you go?
Not really. Just if you're a startup and you're working in area, keep positive. I'm still as much a believer as I ever was. Sometimes, we've seen times when technologies like iPhones take over so quickly that you think that that's the way it should be all the time. But the slow burn is more common. Useful technology often takes time to percolate, and I having some as a guy who's been in data storage and data management for almost all of my professional life, we need these sorts of solutions to work. The fake information is becoming, with AI, is going to become one of the number one threats to society at large, right? And the one technology we've got that it has a potential to combat that is distributed ledger technology. So, we need to get it working. It's a bit like, when we got the internet working, it's got to work, and we've got to keep, behind the scenes. It took the internet, 20 years to actually sort of like until the web came and it exploded. And that's, I think, where we are now, getting the infrastructure for the next generation of software applications going.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Guy. We hope that you will continue to keep us posted on your progress, and enjoy the rest of your very early morning, your time.